France has ended all aid to Israel, and what's important is Israel just threatened France for doing that. The French President Macron said, quote, France will no longer be delivering any weapons to Israel. And in response to that, Netanyahu said, quote, any country that does not stand with Israel is supporting Iran and its proxies. Now on the surface, it does seem like this is true, that France has stopped delivering weapons to Israel. But as you look into it more and you dig a bit deeper, it gets quite interesting. Now around the same time that Netanyahu said this about France and supposedly threatened France, France delivered a really big batch of weapons to the British RAF base in Cyprus. And that British RAF base is actually really well known as being a big proxy of Israel. In fact, the UK regularly uses it to support Israel. And so because of that, a lot of people are saying that France might have delivered this big batch of weapons to Cyprus just for another country to come along, pick up those weapons and deliver them to Israel and finish that delivery. Of course, there's no proof of that. People are just asking questions at the moment, but to be fair, they are quite interesting questions. And that's especially as France has always been a really big ally and supporter of Israel. In fact, France not long ago sent some of their warships to the Red Sea to fight against the Houthis in Yemen, and at the time there was a lot of credible information that the Houthis were hitting warships. Now it's worth knowing something slightly separate to this is that at the same time France is still expected to be delivering air defense systems to Israel. It seems likely that France has stopped delivering all offensive weapons to Israel like missiles and bombs, but at the same time they'll still be delivering air defense systems so that Israel has the capability to defend themselves if they ever need to. But if you're new here, this is my daily news recap where I summarize all of the most important news from the last 24 hours, which you probably haven't heard about. At least I hope you haven't heard about it. Next up though, India just started working with Afghanistan, literally after Pakistan bombed Afghanistan yesterday. In fact, India is reopening their embassy in Kabul, the same place that Pakistan bombed. And to be fair, it seems like India has just done this to piss Pakistan off. India already hates Pakistan. If you don't know, yesterday when Pakistan was carrying out these airstrikes onto Kabul in Afghanistan, the Afghani foreign minister visited India and he met with the Indian foreign minister. And after these meetings that took place over the last 2 days, India Today said, quote, India is fully committed to the sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence of Afghanistan. And to be fair, this seems like more of a backhanded attack at Pakistan rather than India actually trying to fix their relations with Afghanistan. But of course you have to remember that these Pakistani airstrikes on Afghanistan yesterday were not completely unprovoked. The groups that Pakistan carried out these airstrikes onto routinely carry out huge attacks on Pakistan, and they kill dozens of people in a lot of the cases. So really, Pakistan was just defending themselves, trying to stop these attacks from taking place again in the future. But either way, India and Afghanistan didn't care about that. India spoke on them reopening their embassy in Kabul, and India said, quote, closer cooperation between us contributes to Afghanistan's national development, as well as regional stability and resilience. But this really is quite a big deal. Pakistan has now been sandwiched between two countries that not only hate Pakistan, but are now working together. Free up the Pakistanis. Next up, Israel is playing against Italy this week, but there is a huge protest that's scheduled to take place outside of the football stadium, and Italy is panicking over this. If you don't know, this week the World Cup qualifiers are taking place, and Israel is set to play against Italy in Italy on Wednesday. But because of what Israel's been doing to Gaza, pretty much everyone wants Israel to be kicked out of the World Cup and not be allowed to play. And on Wednesday, possibly more than 20,000 people are going to be outside of the football stadium to protest about this, and Italy is panicking. They've placed all of their security onto really high alert. The group organising this protest said, quote, our demands remain unchanged and our pressure will cease only when the Palestinian people are fully free. Now, of course, this year there's been a lot of politics involved in the World Cup already. I mean, the World Cup isn't until next year, but the US is already talking about banning Iran from being able to play, and the rest of the world is talking about kicking Israel out. But to be fair, on the topic of Israel being kicked out and disqualified from the World Cup, it seems like that might actually happen, and that's because at least 40 of the most well-known countries on the planet have said that they will not be playing in the World Cup if Israel is allowed to play. And I've said before plenty of times that if 40 countries don't play in the World Cup, you don't really have much of a World Cup. Regardless of that though, these protests could be really quite a big deal. Like I said, at least 20,000 people are going to be outside the football stadium, and Italy, at a minimum, is panicking over this. Right, next up, something slightly bloody different. A man just skied down Mount Everest. Seriously. And if you thought that wasn't enough, he was the first person to do it without using any oxygen tanks. And for the record, if you were a normal person doing this, you'd die. In fact, this was the first time that anybody had ever gone up and down Mount Everest without using any oxygen tanks, and the first time that anybody had skied down Mount Everest. I mean, it doesn't just stop there. Because he wanted to ski down Mount Everest, he had to do it at a time of the year when there was nobody else on the mountain. And of course, that means he had to do it during the off-season, when it's usually way too dangerous for anybody to climb up the mountain, but clearly not too dangerous for him. I mean, despite the fact that it's minus 40 degrees and the snow is like 20 feet deep, he still did it. And to be fair, he did a bloody good job of it. But it's worth knowing that for Andrei Barguil, the guy that did this is nothing new. In fact, just a few years ago, he did the same thing on the second tallest mountain in the world. Now, really, the most crazy part about this is not only did he climb 16 hours up Mount Everest without using any bottled oxygen, but after he spent that 16 hours with technically less oxygen than you need to survive, almost immediately at the summit of Mount Everest, he strapped on his skis and just skied straight down the mountain like it was nothing. In fact, only 200 people have ever climbed up Mount Everest without using bottled oxygen, so I'm not exaggerating that alone is a really big deal. This actually got really quite a lot of attention, especially in Poland, as the guy that did this is Polish. The Polish Prime Minister said, quote, "This really proves that the sky is no limit for the poles." And well, I guess he's right. This is pretty bloody crazy. Right, back to the normal news again. Indonesia just banned Israel from being able to compete at the World Gymnastics Championships this year, which are taking place in Indonesia. Now, it actually gets quite a lot more interesting. Obviously, Indonesia has done this due to Israel's attacks on Gaza, but Indonesia was risking quite a lot by doing this. It gets quite interesting. The organisation which hosts the World Gymnastics Championships, which picked Indonesia to host them later this year, actually really disagrees with this decision by Indonesia, and they think that Israel should be allowed to compete. And so because this organisation is allowing the Israeli athletes to compete in these World Championships, Indonesia has taken it into their own hands, and they've declined the visas for the entire Israeli national team. And that means regardless of what this organisation does or says, the Israeli athletes are not going to be able to compete because they simply can't visit Indonesia to compete. But as I said at the start, this was really quite a big risk for Indonesia, and that's because the organisation which hosts these World Gymnastics Championships said that they reserve the right to swap countries if a country doesn't allow any other countries to compete in the World Championships. So even though there was the risk that the organisation might pull out and Indonesia would lose out on all of this tourism money, Indonesia went ahead with this and they banned the Israeli national team from competing. But this isn't something new. Indonesia just doesn't allow Israelis into the country full stop, and they definitely don't allow Israel to compete in world sporting events which are taking place in Indonesia. Right, next up, North Korea just unveiled a nuclear missile which can reach anywhere on the planet, which is something that even Western and US nuclear missiles cannot do. North Korea said, quote, "This is our most powerful nuclear weapon system yet." Now, this missile is actually called the Hwasong 20, and if you don't know, it's an upgraded version of the Hwasong 15, which was first unveiled back in 2017. And it's worth knowing that that missile, which was first unveiled back in 2017, which this one is an upgraded version of, was the first nuclear missile which could reach the US mainland. But just 8 years later, North Korea has almost 4x'd these missiles' capabilities, and now these missiles can reach almost anywhere on the planet, which is quite scary. Now, North Korea actually unveiled this at one of their military parades this weekend. This was not just an announced unveiling. This took a lot of people by surprise. But one of the main things that's really quite interesting about this nuclear missile, which is probably the most scary, is that this nuclear missile does not create just one explosion. In fact, this nuclear missile creates dozens, and it can carry dozens of warheads. If you don't know, that means that this missile explodes above the target it's intended to hit, and fires out dozens of different nuclear missiles which all hit their targets. To be fair, the main reason for that is that it makes these missiles a lot harder to intercept, because it's a lot easier to intercept one missile than it is to intercept 15. North Korea said, quote, "Multiple warheads will increase the stress on existing air defense systems." And they also said, quote, "Kim sees this as necessary to achieve a meaningful deterrence against Washington." Really quite big news, to be fair. It's quite scary. I'm sure the thing won't be fired anytime soon. I mean, they haven't even started testing it, but it's definitely worth knowing about. I'm currently looking at a lizard, 2 lizards actually, because I'm in Indonesia and there's loads of wildlife here. Right, that's all the news for the day though. I almost just killed a fly, what the fuck? Right, that's all the news for the day though. If you found out something that you didn't know about, please do subscribe, because that's the whole marketing of this, is that I'll tell you the news that you won't really find anywhere else. So yeah, that's all it is for today, and I will see you tomorrow for the next daily recap. I'm going to show you the lizard, because I can.